Hi, everybody, and welcome to our third show on Contact Talk Radio. Today, I'm speaking with someone I love dearly and is a collaborator in the Evolutionary Collective. His name is Jeff Carreira. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a moment. The topic today is being on the inside, the power of evolutionary commitment. And one of the things I just want to say before I do an official introduction of him is that many of the topics, Jeff and I are going to be doing the show once a month because we are working together in the Evolutionary Collective and we're teaching together, and there's just like a huge amount of content and work that we can, topics that we can share with you that I hope will be really, really valuable. And so this is our first one for the month of March, and we'll be speaking again in April and each month after that. So commitment and the way in which we're going to approach it, a lot of the things that we're going to address are the kinds of things that you don't necessarily think about, that are the things that, it's kind of like the air or oxygen. They're things that are in the environment or in a relationship or in life. And unless you're pointed towards it, you don't realize how completely it influences everything. That it actually has more impact than the things that, for the most part, we're paying attention to. We're looking at the content of things. So we will be dealing with those kinds of subjects, and today commitment is one of them. So Jeff is currently the Director of Education at EnlightenNext, where he coordinates and guides an ongoing development of a worldwide network of individuals who are committed to individual and collective evolution. And he spent the last 2 decades helping to build and guide a global movement of these evolving individuals. He's an amazing teacher. He's also a philosopher. He has a blog called Evolutionary Philosophy, and he shares his perspectives and his vast knowledge there with me, which I really appreciate. And he works with founder of EnlightenNext, Andrew Cohen, who's an awakened teacher and who's a formidable force in this world, who I respect a lot. So, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Patricia. It's so fantastic to be here on our first of our monthly series of radio shows.
Yeah, it's great. So let's talk about commitment. I mean, people have a lot of different ideas, a lot of aversion. Some people, we have a lot of, I think, sort of mental, automatic perspectives about it. But what I'd like to talk about first is like what we mean. It's like what is commitment? What is evolutionary commitment? So do you want to start? Because you're...
Sure. I mean, I would certainly agree. I mean, that the interesting thing about commitment, or at least at the most mundane level, is most of us have a kind of habitual knee-jerk, not wholly positive response to being committed ourselves, and yet we're very frustrated with other people who won't commit to us.
Right.
So it's interesting how that works. But I think when you and I are speaking about, there's lots of different types of commitments and there's lots of different levels of commitments. But in terms of an evolutionary commitment, we're really talking about a commitment in relationship between people, in which what the individuals are committed to is the growth and the development and the evolution of all the individuals and of the space that exists between the individuals. And that's a very unique kind of commitment, because often in committed relationship, you're committing to a person as they are. And we all know that a lot of problems in relationship occur because people change.
Or they don't change.
Or they don't change. And in this case, we're committed to the change.
Right.
Which means you're on the ride. The relationship is going somewhere, and you're committed to staying with it.
So I just want to underline that for a moment. So the first element is that in an evolutionary commitment and an evolutionary relationship, what you're committed to is your own growth and development, that when push comes to shove, you will keep opening, growing, discovering what the truth is, going to a higher place, letting go of what might be comfortable for a higher and greater development. And you're committed to the other person's development, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're committed to what happens between you, that continues to grow and develop.
Right.
And that whatever it takes, which is an element of commitment, that you're willing to do that. You're willing to make that more important than your fears, your concerns, your embarrassment, your, anything else doesn't get to be the priority.
Right.
Okay.
And I think, that's obviously very different. I mean, often in relationships that don't have that explicitly evolutionary nature,
right,
two people get, they may be very committed, and then one starts to change, and it feels to the other like the commitment's been broken. That in a more static model of committed relationship, you feel beholden to continue to be the person you were when the commitment took place initially.
It's interesting because I think people don't often think about what are you actually committing to.
Mm-hmm.
Even
That's right.
with any, well, let's just stay in the topic of relationships, but what are you committed to? Sometimes people feel like in certain normal relationships, you're committed to not disturbing their ego.
Mm-hmm.
And I always feel personally, given who I am, very controlled by that. Then it's like landmines. Like I have these bunch of landmines that I have to not step on, because if I step on them, I'll get blown up. And then I still have to be committed and stay there. And I know personally I have no commitment to, trying to not bother someone or to not bring up their insecurity or to not, challenge something that actually would serve them.
Mm. Right. No, and it's a profound point, actually, that people often make commitments to each other without really thinking carefully, without really being fully aware of what it is they're committing to.
Right.
And then later feel like somehow, often the way it turns out is you feel like the other person broke some commitment that was actually never completely clear in the first place.
Right. Right. Well, a lot of it, from an ego standpoint, when you commit to a relationship, a lot of it is that you're going to make me feel good. I'm committed to getting what I want.
Right.
I'm committed to feeling comfortable. I'm committed to the stability of the relationship, even if that means that I don't grow and you don't grow.
Right.
In order to maintain this and stay together forever and not disturb anything. So, yeah, I do think that that's a different conversation, but just to look at all the things that we're unconsciously agreeing to.
Right. Well, look, if we want to be sort of right honest about, the general state of the postmodern world, one of our big cultural problems is narcissism. And often when people get committed, what they're really getting committed to without thinking about it is committed to feeling the way I feel right now.
Right.
They feel great. I love it when I'm with you. This is magnificent. We've had the greatest, 3 weeks together. I'm committed to feeling this way with you. But without really, realizing that that's completely unrealistic, and that, and then when that feeling goes away, you somehow feel like someone broke a commitment. And it wasn't you, because you're still committed to feeling that good.
Right.
So you can see why we run into problems.
Well, let's look at some different pieces, because it's like there's different elements. So you brought up the societal piece, which I think is worth talking about, because we're all swimming inside of
right.
the same cultural world, especially those of us that are in America or Northern Europe. We have a certain way of being around commitment, and it's different than it was when I think my parents, were young. I think there was a different interpretation of commitment and what was appropriate and what was right and what was wrong. So what do you, when you talk about postmodern, talk a little bit about what you mean and then how commitment looks in a postmodern world that we're swimming in, that seems to be the cultural norm.
Right. Well, if we think in kind of the broadest, simplest strokes, and if we just think of modernism, like you said, probably my parents and grandparents and your parents and grandparents, and the image of Beaver Cleaver from the classic TV show, the idea was if you were a man, then you would get married, for instance. And there's a certain commitment in marriage that it doesn't have to do that, and that commitment has to do with a role, the role of being husband, and then later, if you have children, the role of being father.
Yeah,
what it
there's
doesn't
certain
have
assumptions in that commitment that were cultural.
That's right. That were
and you would provide, and wear a fedora.
That's right.
Totally kidding. Go ahead.
But there was a whole role of being a husband, being a father, being a wife, being a mother, and on and on and on. And those roles had built into them commitments.
Right.
And the great postmodern revolution, which is typified by the '60s, was a mass cultural questioning of all those roles, and all the commitments that went along with them.
Right.
And so what emerged as what is often spoken of as postmodernism was a cultural attitude in which personal happiness and personal fulfillment became what was unquestioned. That everyone is culturally raised to believe that the highest, the thing that they should be most committed to is their own happiness and their own fulfillment. And that's what their commitment is. Not that people are not committed. They're committed to being happy and fulfilled moment to moment.
And prior to that, it was really important to do it right, to actually fulfill those roles. And even before that, I mean, when you watch those movies where people are like in the early 1900s, I mean, you were shamed. I mean, if you didn't fulfill that level of commitment, I mean, you were actually ostracized and lost all your standing in society.
That's right.
So it was a big deal. So it was a good thing to actually get to the point where the commitment could be to your own happiness.
Right. It was. I
mean, that was a good thing.
Right, because I know that you've watched Mad Men, so you can see why it was a good thing, because people were just going through roles and they were miserable, and they were also acting out a lot.
Right.
Because it was kind of an unrealistic expectation in the first place. People weren't particularly healthy.
Yeah.
They were just working really hard to be well behaved and didn't really know any better.
So a lot of freedom got created, and then the freedom created the possibility of, well, what makes me happy? All right, so that's the new commitment, which I grew up in, as a baby boomer. Right.
And then the unanticipated negative consequence of that, because the postmodern revolution was looking at the commitments of the past and recognizing that many of them weren't actually worth committing to.
Right. Totally.
That this idea that
it was bankrupt.
Just because you're married, no matter how miserable the marriage gets, that you have to stay together doesn't actually make complete sense. There could be a time when splitting up actually makes more sense for everybody.
Yeah.
But the unanticipated negative consequence has been that tendency's gone so far that it's become very difficult for people to commit to anything, and very difficult for them to recognize that there are some things that are worth sacrificing for, that are worth putting your moment-to-moment happiness aside for a bigger, more long-term aspiration.
Well, each thing, obviously, is developmental. So, I mean, each thing, hopefully, as societies, as we grow, the answer to the problem that starts to happen at the end of the cultural, it's like cultures seem to have a certain growth period, over 40 years or 100 years or whatever it is. But towards the end, what was the good thing in the beginning becomes the problem at the end.
Right. Absolutely.
New problem. And so the problem at the end of that was this restriction and this sense of being trapped in things that didn't really work and never were thought about to begin with. So then we started to, our generation was like, well, what makes me happy? And then the way to track what makes you happy is a moment-to-moment kind of checking to see, how do I feel and how does this affect me, and do I like it, do I not like it, right? So that was useful to actually develop those muscles, to have some kind of interiority.
Right.
But now, 40 years later, we have the new problem, which is that can't be, given like who you are in the universe, like I'm me, Patricia, one human being. And as I extend myself in my relationships and the sense of being a global citizen, that I'm only busy with how I feel, and that my choices and decisions and commitments are coming just from how I feel moment to moment, is kind of like the wrong navigating device at this point.
Right. Right.
So we're going to take a break in just for a moment, and then we're going to come back and we're going to, I'm speaking with Jeff Carreira. This is Patricia Albere, if you're just tuning in. And we're talking about evolutionary commitment. And the particular piece that we're addressing right now is just the societal part, the part that we're all swimming in, the things that we assume are just true, and we're actually questioning that, on the level of commitment. So we'll talk a bit about more of that when we come back. Okay, hi everybody. We're back, and we're talking about the societal part of commitment. So we were speaking about, Jeff and I were talking about the fact that our particular society, especially for the last 40 years, has been focused on our commitment is to our personal happiness. And that may not be at this point, since we're, some people are starting to move into a higher level, is that we're going to need to include more than just like, what works for me is my commitment. Right, Jeff?
That's right. That's right. I was just thinking, Patricia, one of the ways that you and I, and probably many of the people who would listen to this broadcast, experience this, because the Evolutionary Collective and the work that we're doing is so focused on human potential and human development and spiritual growth, and what we find, and I'm sure anyone else who's involved in either their own growth or supporting and facilitating the growth of others, is that it gets very difficult for people to commit to their own development. Often they're very excited about it at the beginning, and they feel the inspiration that comes from those kind of early victories that we all tend to have on the path. But when inevitably we start to need to extend ourselves and make effort and live through the challenges that are inherent in development, you see people start to drop off. It's no longer good for me.
Right.
And what I personally feel is so painful as a teacher is to see people who have such incredible potential that don't give themselves the opportunity to realize it because they can't commit for the long term.
Well, here's another piece with the evolutionary commitment. Given that you're committing to growth and development and to something higher, for sure. I mean, you actually have to have that commitment, because the ego, all of the things that are challenged along that way, are the ego's attachments. I mean, that's the only way you can find out what's going to arise that actually keeps you exactly where you are.
Right.
So if you can't, at that moment, surrender and look at what's arising, then you actually never grow.
That's right.
So, and also watching even people make the commitments, make a commitment to an evolutionary relationship, you can actually see that it's everything. It's like, it's exactly the thing that is their issue, and that gets in the way of them being more expanded, more wonderful, more great, more amazing, more loving, more humble. I mean, it's whatever their little thing is about money or time, or, they don't trust enough, or whatever it is their issue.
Right.
So.
Right. No, the big thing that we're often avoiding is the commitment. And it's often masked under other things and other reasons, and our own inabilities or lack of interest or whatever it would be. But in the end, the commitment, and really putting a stake in the ground is the thing people find most challenging.
So let's talk a little bit about the power of commitment. I mean, one of the definitions that I know you liked when I shared it with you was that to be fully committed, and this is a really useful thing just from a person to their life or to something that they're working on, not just to another person, is to be completely committed, is to be completely shaped by what you're committed to the point that you become one with it.
Right.
So if I'm utterly committed to, leading a movement that creates more love in the world, and I devote myself to that, and I allow my life to take the shape of that commitment, I will become that movement. I will become that love.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I am no longer the person who started off the commitment, right?
Right.
Or if
Right.
I'm committed to being a concert violinist, then that commitment shapes me into becoming one and becoming that concert violinist.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right. That's beautiful.
So commitment is powerful, and I want to talk a little bit about like what are the qualities of a person. It's because we usually think about it's the thing that we're committing to. Like, do I want to commit to that thing or not? And most people don't notice whether or not they're a committed person. They're the kind of person who has the capacity for commitment.
Right.
Because there are people that just, they can commit, and some people that just never do. So let's look at, so what are the characteristics and qualities of a committed person? What do they tend to have?
Well, I mean, some of the things that that you and I have discussed as we've gone into this topic is, some of the characteristics that if you don't have these, being committed will be very difficult, if not impossible.
Right.
Are courage. People who can't be courageous, commitments are not easy, and particularly if it's an evolutionary commitment, which means it's a commitment to developing, which means it's a commitment to an ongoing state of letting go of the way things have been and embracing new possibilities for how they could be. So you're committing to a certain amount of ongoing insecurity, and you need to have courage,
right?
In order to do that. Also you need to be open. There needs to be a kind of receptivity.
Right.
To be committed. You can't be defended. People who are defended and are, sort of approaching life with their hand up can't really be, committed that way.
And there's something, too, about, like, committed people can be committed to something that has never existed yet. Like, somehow they're willing to, like, commit to something without the certainty of for sure they can find it or for sure they can do it. They're just like, you know what, I'm going to do it. It's like, Jeff knows I'm very late in the game as far as, getting caught up with current culture. So I recently, have Netflix and started watching 24, which everybody was watching like in 2000, I guess. With Jack Bauer and the whole thing. And I love, he's such a demonstration of being a committed person because he's like, in one level, he can say, okay, no matter, I'm going to do this, even though there's no certainty that he can do it. There's something about a committed person that they find their way no matter what.
That's right.
To things that you can't, that aren't predictable.
That's right.
I don't know what that is. I'm not sure what it is, but I know that it's an awesome capacity and power.
Well, one of the things that really just was occurring to me while you were saying that, and in terms of anybody listening to this, one of the messages I would want people to really get and think about is that when you commit, and we could talk about levels of commitment, but in the end, you're either committed or you're not.
Yeah.
I mean, you could talk about levels of commitment, but that basically means levels of lack of commitment.
Right.
And because commitment is an absolute. If you're committed, you're committed. That's it. And when you commit, energies become all of the resistance to committing
Mm-hmm.
goes away, and literally you feel like, energy and power that comes somehow from the universe itself begins to become available to you. So much more energy and vision become available because you're committed now.
And here's the other thing. I love that. It's true. It's almost like the universe knows if you're not for real. Like the moment you really commit, then all of a sudden, like whoosh, it comes through. Like you're waiting for that before you commit, but it doesn't come until you do commit. The other thing is you can't see the possibilities. Like uncommitted people can't see that there's like 26 different doors that could open. There's 5 different ways you could get there. That's why I love the Jack Bauer thing, because he's, always on some kind of mission. That from a committed place, you see how to get it done, where you can't see that before you're committed. You only see the blocks, the obstacles, and why it won't work.
And I'm sure
interesting.
It's very interesting. And I'm sure people can relate, even in more mundane experiences, or maybe more profound ones.
Yeah.
You can be looking at something and contemplating commitment and wanting to commit, and you don't see any way, and you don't see any way, and you don't have the energy. But if you make the commitment to do it, you immediately start to feel like your vision opens up, your perception opens up, you start to realize connections that you didn't see before, and you have all the energy in the world to actually get it done.
Yeah, and there's support, and often there's money, and there's all kinds of things that come. So the qualities of a committed person is and there's no easy way. I mean, there's no way to just like make it easy. It always takes courage. It always takes a risk. It always takes like investing yourself and putting yourself on the line in some kind of way that's wholehearted.
That's right.
And so let's look at what are the qualities of an uncommitted person. Well, I bet we could get a lot of people to join in with that one.
We all know those uncommitted people.
Okay, those other people that are uncommitted that are not us, of course.
I mean, one last quality of a committed person, which I think relates to the first quality that comes to mind for an uncommitted person is, it takes a lot of honesty to be committed, because there are a lot of cultural movements in us, cultural attitudes, which make it easy for us to think we're committed when we're not.
Like what? Make that more vivid.
Because the standard for commitment in the postmodern world is so low, and what people will accept.
It's called I'm doing the best I can. That supposedly poses as a commitment, which is just nonsense. Because most people are never doing the best they can.
That's right, and so the standard for commitment is so low that you can be slightly above abysmal and still feel like you're the most committed person you ever met, but you're not really touching the kind of commitment that's really possible. And the other one is that in our culture, the way that we look for commitment, or the way that we define commitment, tends to be a feeling. So if you have
commitment is a feeling,
right? And if you say, "Am I committed?" If you ask someone, "Are you committed to doing something?" what they'll tend to do is look inside to see if, when they think about being committed, they feel some kind of inner sense of conviction, strength, confidence. And if they feel that, then they'll say, "Yes, I'm committed." Well, and then you say, "How do you know you're committed?" "Because I looked inside and I felt the feeling of commitment."
Right.
But then, of course, when things get challenging, they look inside, they don't feel that feeling anymore. Now they feel insecure, uncertain,
fear.
But rather than looking at that and not giving up the position of being committed, often they'll look at that, they'll see all of this insecurity and uncertainty, and then they'll start to question whether they are actually committed.
So then so a lot of people go, well, then where do I look?
Right, but that's the thing that
where do I look? So if I'm not looking at my feelings, I mean, your feelings are going to tell you that you're scared. I mean, most commitment, in my own experience, just being committed to what I'm doing in my work and stuff like that, I feel a million different things and,
Right.
Want to give up and think I'm crazy and, sometimes it's too hard. But that doesn't determine what I'm doing.
Right. That's
So
right.
where do people look? What would you call that?
Well, then I would say that you can't look for commitment, because if you're looking for commitment, that means the commitment exists somewhere outside of you.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so the place you find commitment is in your own choice to commit
And keeping your word.
and keeping your word. And if you really start to think about
Right.
what that means, it's like, it's a true commitment. A true commitment that's stable is an unsupported choice to be committed.
Right.
It doesn't depend on how you feel. It doesn't depend on how likely it is that you're going to succeed.
Right.
It doesn't depend. It only depends on the fact that you are choosing to commit.
Right.
And when you experience the power of a freestanding, unsupported, absolutely and utterly, liberated choice to commit, and the power of that, because nothing can rock it.
Right.
It's
well, giving
freestanding.
your word. I remember when I worked with Werner Erhard, he was very strong about giving and keeping your word.
Right.
As a method of commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And that your word, which in postmodern society, it's like what we say, we don't hold that's sacred.
Right.
That if I give my word to you, or if I give my word to myself, that's actually something that I will line up behind, even if my feelings change, or even if it looks like it's going to be difficult. And
right.
his thing, and he proved it. I mean, I could actually see it happen. Like the closer I would stay to being careful about giving my word.
Right.
And when I gave my word, that I honored it. Do you know what I mean? And if there was ever a time where I couldn't, that I took responsibility, that I would say something like, then, I mean, I never just ignored that I had given my word.
Right, right.
And that eventually your word becomes law in the universe. Like, as far as he was concerned, if you lived that way and you were a committed person and you lived honoring your word and living from it and allowing your actions to be in alignment with it, that, he got to the point where there were times where he, like the weather, I mean, he could make things happen. That's the thing about commitment too, is that when you have that hookup, and I'm sure people can relate to this. There are times in your life where you're somehow really paying attention to this, and you're really clear, and you're really there, where you have power. Your intentionality has power. You go, it shall be, kind of like, when God created the world. And it is. And it actually manifests with less effort and less trouble. And you know that it will, because you're going to make it happen anyway. But a lot of times when you get to that point, you become very powerful.
Yes.
As far as manifestation goes.
Right. Because a commitment like that, when you mean it, it's a yes.
Yeah.
And the experience, no, the experience of no is a blocking of energy. If you say no to something, you stop all your energy. You say, no, I'm not. But when you say yes, your energy focuses and it goes to whatever you said yes to.
And if it becomes that you are that kind of person, so we're still talking about the committed person because it's kind of fascinating.
Right, I went back to the committed person.
I know. So, and there's power. I mean, somebody who's a committed person has personal power. And a relationship that has that has incredible power. So when we come back, we're gonna take another just really short break. We're going to talk a little bit about what the qualities are of an uncommitted person, so that we can just contrast that. And then also, how do we stay in a commitment? How do we develop that ability to be stronger and more powerful in this very human capacity, but very important. Okay, everyone. So we're it's Patricia Albere and Jeff Carreira, and we are dialoguing about commitment and about the power of it, and about how do you distinguish it, and what's possible there, and we're gonna be talking about too, like how do we get stronger? How do we become more committed people so that we really have more and more power and just power in our own lives, to be able to really bring things into existence. So we were talking about the qualities of a committed person, getting very carried away with that. So what are the qualities of an uncommitted person? How can you distinguish if somebody's, or in yourself if you're not being very committed?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
because it's often disguised, right?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that you often feel when people are uncommitted is you just inherently feel that you can't trust them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they may think they're committed. Like, as I was saying earlier, we're pretty good at deceiving ourselves into thinking that we're committed, particularly if we feel committed.
Right.
If we feel committed, we can be very good at acting like we're committed. But often, particularly if you're a little bit savvy, I mean, I know when I see someone who's feeling very confident and inspired and they're speaking as if they're very committed, I mean, I like to hold that loosely until I see how they are when they're not inspired and confident and when it's challenging. And then if they're still totally committed, then I start to feel like this is somebody I can really trust.
Right. And that's pretty strong in our society as well, as people get, they're really inspired and they're really kind of all over something, and then it means nothing.
Right.
2 seconds later, it means nothing. And I think a lot of us have, it's discouraging. It's kind of like it's become normal, but it's nevertheless very disturbing, and I think it really does affect the quality of our relationships.
Right. No,
because you kind of give up on that person, or if you've done it, it feels bad. It feels like there's nothing real. Right,
and you actually start to give up on the possibility of commitment, and you and I know, you meet, particularly in transformational work, you just meet a lot of people who don't even realize that they've kind of given up on the possibility that they could be really committed, or that other people could be really committed, or that there could be relationships where there was true, honest, ongoing, not going to be knocked around by how anybody feels commitment. And I think that's, one of the things that most inspires people, is when they actually see that commitment is really possible.
And also, I mean, I think that's one of the things we've talked about, like in our work with the Evolutionary Collective, in order to activate a certain power and a certain kind of consciousness and things that are really worth doing, you have to have commitment. I mean, you can't have people that are just there when it feels good. So we demand that, we invoke that, and people, when they realize what a gift it is to actually be with other people that they can count on, and that they can count on us, it's just such a relief.
Right, and that's why that work has garnered such incredible goodwill.
Yeah,
because people recognize the possibility to be intertwined in truly committed evolutionary relationships. When people realize that it's authentic.
And being on the inside, I just want to say that, and then we can go back to the qualities. We keep avoiding the qualities of the uncommitted person.
They're not as much fun.
I know. Is when you're committed, it doesn't mean you're perfect, but it means that, especially in a relationship, that if you and I are committed, which we are, if I get scared, or if I have issues, or I feel unworthy, or something happens, I can bring it up inside our relationship and inside the fact that we're committed, not as like I'm outside of it saying, well, I'm starting to have these feelings, so maybe I don't want to be committed anymore.
Right. Or maybe I'm not committed.
Yeah. So I'm scared and I'm still committed. And and then you bring it to the relationship, or to the group, or to what's there, because you're inside of it.
Right.
Instead of on the outside, finding reasons and justifications for why you're leaving.
Right. And one, I don't know, I'm going to continue on with that thought, even though because I think it's important. And the way that I've been thinking about this recently, the same idea of staying on the inside is recognizing that most of us have unknowingly, or many people have unknowingly been practicing and developing a habit of being uncommitted.
Mm-hmm.
That
Just gotten used to it.
They've gotten used to it, and they've developed a habit. And the habit is you commit to something, you go along so far, you feel challenged, your feeling of commitment, your feeling of confidence in the commitment disappears in the face of the uncertainty and insecurity of being challenged.
Right.
And then you step out of your commitment and then start to question whether or not you're committed.
And then you're judging the thing from the outside too.
Right.
I mean, the other reason why, especially with a collective and a group, and if you want to accomplish something like in your company or whatever it is, if you have people that are committed from the inside, then if they see something that's not working, they'll find a way to support getting it to work instead of going, that doesn't work, you fix it, or I'm leaving.
Right.
And so that, you can't really accomplish anything together if people are, going to jump out at the moment that they don't like it or they see something that doesn't work. So some of the qualities, just wait. Before
okay, go ahead. The qualities of the uncommitted.
Yeah, well, just so we can see it in ourselves. I mean, it's not like we're all, this isn't about trying to be, it's about seeing. There's hesitancy.
Mm-hmm.
There's usually a lot of rationalizations for why you're not something.
Right.
You have a lot of reasons. Why something can't work, something won't work, why you can't do it, why, a committed person usually just commits and then they work it out.
Right. That's right. They work it out from the inside of the commitment.
Yeah. And they're unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a reasonableness in uncommitted people. Any little thing kind of throws them off or, makes it so that they aren't committed.
Right.
There's a weakness, actually, of character. There's not resourcefulness and strength. They're kind of weak and justifying things and, sort of pointing to why the circumstances aren't right instead of why they can't make something happen.
Right. Which another way to say what you're saying is that they're fundamentally somehow victimized.
Yeah, committed people have a kind of causality. There's some connection to the source.
Right. Right. And they're responsible.
Yeah, that you can't even explain. Like when you have it, you're like, that's going to happen. And it's like the universe is on your side. So how do we get more committed? So let's talk about that before we run out of time.
Well,
how do people get stronger in that?
Well, one of the things that I think doesn't work is to try and force yourself to be more committed. Right. Which is what people mostly do, is they think, well, I'm not a very committed person. Now I have this opportunity to commit, and I'm going to somehow grit my teeth, tense my muscles, and kind of create some kind of psychic energy and force myself to commit.
Yeah.
But what you're doing when you're doing that, if you look at it, is you're trying to generate a feeling of commitment, that inner feeling of confidence that's so strong it won't go away. But that's not commitment. That's just a feeling of confidence that you're trying to kind of inflict on yourself.
Right. Right.
And
that's not going to work.
Yeah, and that's inherently a position of being sort of not in control. You're saying, well, if I need to generate this powerful feeling of confidence, so then I can be committed.
So, what would be a good practice for someone to, let's say, you notice because of the call or this particular conversation, that it might be that you're very committed in some areas of your life or in particular relationships, but you're really, really weak in some area. Like when it comes to your health or something, you're just like pathetic. It's like you give up in a second. How would someone get stronger?
Well,
what would you say?
The practice I would recommend is when you get to the point of being challenged, which is, in any commitment, there's going to be many opportunities to be challenged on your commitment. Those are going to be the moments where you're tempted to go into the uncommitted consciousness of questioning whether or not you're committed.
Right.
And so rather than do that, stay committed and look at the challenge from being committed.
So, but if somebody wasn't good at it, so let's say in a relationship, so what they could do would be to be really clear about what exactly they are committed to within that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something precise and specific and clear so that it's not just some big generic thing that they don't understand.
Right. Right.
And then make that clear to the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And then within that, when it starts to be difficult, then to say to the other person from inside the commitment, this is getting hard for me, and this is what's coming up. You know, what do I still need to do to keep this commitment so that they're staying connected, staying related, but they could also let up what's challenging them without it displacing their commitment.
Right.
That might be a good place to start, right?
Definitely. I think it would be a great place. And another thing to do, I think, is rather than wait for a moment when you're challenged, which of course is going to be the most difficult moment, just take any commitment that you have and just as a thought experiment, you know, imagine yourself stepping out of the commitment. You know, imagine you're challenged before you're actually under the emotional stress of really being challenged.
Yeah, that's a good practice, actually.
And just allow yourself to emotionally step out into what kind of conversation do you have with yourself or with the other, if the conversation is revolving around figuring out whether or not you're committed, versus what kind of conversation do you have with yourself or the other, if the conversation is occurring in the context of being committed, but needing to deal with the challenge from within the commitment.
I think there's one other piece that just came up when you were talking was, it's also to ask yourself the question, how do I need to grow in order to meet the commitment rather than how do I get out of it?
Right.
So what qualities, what do I need to get stronger in? What do I need to do to get stronger here?
Right.
Rather than how do I run away?
Right. Definitely. And
so that could actually help as well. So
beautiful. Because you really want to, I mean, eventually, you know, because we've developed a habit of seeing ourselves as uncommitted. So it's really what we fall into at the first sign of trouble.
We don't even try to become a more committed person and to get more muscles
there.
So
and we can develop the opposite habit so that we never forget that we're committed.
Yeah. And can you imagine, I mean, just we're going to need to complete, but the more, I mean, that's part of what we're doing in the Evolutionary Collective and in our work is to develop warriors, you know, I mean, people that are strong and capable and have access to the kind of power and energy that commitment allows for. So,
that's
you know, as one thing, you know, I mean, we're working on a lot of other things as well, but definitely. So I want to thank you for our conversation. I do also want to let people know a couple of things. One is next week I'm going to be, actually Jeff introduced me to a wonderful woman named Nora Bateson, whose father was Gregory Bateson, who was a genius, a scientist, a cyberneticist, psychologist, anthropologist. He was actually married to Margaret Mead. I think that was his first wife. And she's made a beautiful film about her father called An Ecology of Mind. And he was one of those geniuses. He's one of those people where just hearing him talk, like knowing what he was, how he approached life, because he was living in a different state of consciousness than most of us. And the particular reason, it's that the name of the show is What is the Pattern That Connects All of Life? And I believe that there is a breakthrough in consciousness that's beginning to unfold for all human beings. That's part of what the show is about. And as we pay more attention to it, we begin to experience life through these different perceptions, have these delicately woven interdependence, cluing us into these larger patterns and expanding our awareness of this sort of continuous flow and change. So, and there's a new show, you know, there's a new show with Jack Bauer in it. With Peter Sutherland.
It's actually, yeah, exactly.
I know. I'm gonna try to stay current this time. Called Touch, and so those of you who haven't seen it or have seen it, it's actually interesting because it's pointing to this whole thing with the patterns and the matrix of what her father was deeply immersed in, and he was, you know, one of those brilliant geniuses that have changed things for all of us. So We're going to get to talk to her and, you know, talk about his contribution to this current consciousness, because he was definitely one of those people that was living something, you know, 60 years before the rest of us are even beginning to open up our little human eyeballs and go, what's that? You know, there must be a new way to be.
Well, I'll give a quick plug for
Yeah,
anybody who's listening. Write it down in your calendar and don't miss it, because it will be absolutely enlightening and delightful.
yeah, that's really, really amazing. So that's what we'll be doing on March 27th at 11 o'clock. And I would just really want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank Jeff for being my eternally committed teaching partner and just one of those men in the world who is strong and capable and committed to evolving consciousness on the planet. And I totally trust him. His commitment to that is irrevocable.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone.
All right. So have a great day, everybody. See you
Bye
next
now.
week.